So welcome back to this week's classes. So we're now going to be focusing on test two. We didn't have a class yesterday, so yesterday's class, which was math, is being run today. The reason being is for fact one, the topic is effects of changes in foreign currency, something like that. Now, there's no real question on it on its own. It will be within other topics. So we will, when we cover other topics, we will cover that section as well. But see that we're not that many. Just quick, like 1 minute each. How are you feeling? Are you back are you back in the zone to study? Still on the resting mode after test one? How are you guys feeling? Ashita, Fakir, Helen?
I think there's a lot of things that I learned from this one. A lot of wrongs probably, but mostly time management. Time management was a big issue. So yeah, I think I'm back into studying. I don't really think there's this time, or I don't have that this time. So yeah, I think I'm back to go.
How are you going to fix the time management aspect?
I think I gotta work through the content a lot quicker. Not a lot quicker, but just a little bit more efficient. And then spend more time on questions before the exam. But I gotta start working at that 60 minutes at least. And then also when the question paper comes, I think I need to tell myself, look, 20 minutes on this question, 15 minutes on that. And if I'm not even done by the first to pass on, otherwise you stay stuck at least half an hour on the first question.
Ashita? Helen? That's good.
Good evening, guys.
Hello.
It was just a wake-up call from my side, hey? Because I was just seeing flames. I think, yeah, what Ashita or Fakir was saying is that the time management. So my main aim is to make sure that after each and every class, I must just attempt a question based on that allocated time and see how I go about it so that I know that test two, at least I am within time. Because you get just juggle around with this invigilator app. I just wish they could just do the venue-based exams or tests.
So this
Invigilator app.
How come is it so distracting? So a lot of people complaining about it. So why is it so distracting? What's the problem with it?
No, like the way you have to take pictures, then you have to take like that 3 minutes thing, you have to take your ID while you're concentrating on the question paper. You have to take a selfie, you have to take the script, scanning of the script as well. Like I feel like, yeah, they must just say that we must just go to the venue and write there. Know that you don't have to scan.
So basically, all of those guys are like breaking your concentration or something of that nature.
Yes. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's what I'm saying, that my main aim is to make sure that after each and every class, when I go and attempt questions, I must just use that allocated time and see how I go about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Nasreen, we're just asking like 1 minute, how are you feeling after test one? We're back into study mode. We're still resting.
No.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I took a bit of a break. The test wasn't too bad. I think just from a timing perspective, I think I just got a little bit wrong, but it wasn't too bad. I think, the lessons that you had was actually quite helpful. Yeah, so yeah, test two, I don't know.
Test two. Any lessons or what you're going to take forward for test two? What if test one taught you that you will try to fix in test two or for test two?
I think, look, it's time management. Fortunately, I think it's a lot of time management, just getting right. But I think working through the examples of similar nature, but like sort of different scenarios, I think that really worked well. because you tend to question and then make sure that your thinking is actually correct on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was actually quite useful. So I think going through exam, not too many though, because I think then you get a bit confused, but going through examples, definitely it helps because it puts it into context. You start to question it and to test. So yeah, I think working through examples is important.
That's going to what. So I was going to give what we call so one of the other guys also asked me to comment on exam time management. So I'm gonna be a little bit more explicit when it comes to exam technique, a little bit more explicit regarding time management, and a little bit more explicit in terms of how to read a scenario. So perhaps I wasn't as explicit as I would like to have been. So what we're going to try to show you more explicitly, how do you read a scenario? Because remember, you are getting your scenario before the time, then you get the required. So you don't know what you must be looking for. So by reading a scenario, you want to get to that point where you can start identifying the various issues. The way you must try to immerse yourself is put yourself in the shoes of, if it's an accountant or whatever, put yourself in that shoes. Try to picture, visualize what you are reading, so that when you're reading the scenario, there might be certain things that kind of trigger off which topic you are busy with. And if you can identify the issue, the topic you are busy with, you need to identify the various consequences or various issues within that topic. So we're going to try to, I'm going to try to bring it more explicit. So how I've been reading is basically trying to show you that, but I'm going to try to also mention, to like directly tell you, this is what you must be looking for. On the time management aspect, so there's different ways of getting your time management right. You get the one, so you're gonna have to figure out which one is most appropriate for you or useful for you. But basically, there's basically two ways. There may be many more, but there's at least two ways. Number one, after you have your after you went through the content, your very first question you can attempt under time pressure. My experience, or what I've seen, observed, it is the really top guys, right? When I say like the top guys, that actually manage to, in the very first question, do something under time pressure. And I'm talking, when I say top, I'm talking about people coming in the top 5 or the top 10. So when I observed and listened, it's the guys who generally in the top 10 when I was at UCT that were able to attempt a question first time, attempting it under time pressure. Whether they finish within time is a separate issue, but they attempted immediately under time pressure. Then the guys like me, that is not necessarily in the top percentile, I was in the middle or somewhat in the middle. I and the many others as well, we'd focus on getting the content right through doing a question. So we don't overly spend time in content. So your lecture or your notes you quickly read, you look to a high level summary of the topic. So for example, if you look at the notes that I provide on the platform, that is basically the high level overview of the topic as a whole. Okay, so we're not, the notes I provide is not textbook level notes, because if I had to provide a textbook level notes, you might as well read a textbook. So I avoid textbook level notes that you do in your spare time and you want to further enhance your understanding. The notes I provide on the platform is to give you a high level overview, what the topic is all about, and the various issues within the topic, and only the main stuff, not all the stuff. Once again, if I have to provide all the stuff, I might as well write a textbook. So once you have a high level overview of what the topic is all about, you attempt a question. But at this time, you ignore time. You don't worry about time. So you attempt a question and you do it thoroughly. Like I said, what is thoroughly? For example, if we take WACC, for example, you come across ordinary share capital and you have to calculate the market rate. You know you can calculate the market rate in 3 ways. You must ask yourself, you must tell yourself you can calculate it in 3 ways. Run the 3 ways through your mind with the formula and then attempt whichever one is applicable. At the end of the scenario, you will then ask yourself the question, what if it was the second method or the third method? So that is what you want to do. You don't worry about time. But then you go on to the next question and you do the same thing. Don't worry about time. Just focus on being able to answer that particular question given the given the scenario. After that, you want to ask yourself again, what if it was, once again, let's say they use CAPM, then you want to say, what if it was dividend growth model? What if it was the bond yield plus risk premium? What would I need? So that is what you want to do. Your first 2 questions, your first 2 to 3 questions, you go through it in that level. You compare different questions. You did question 1, you did question 2. Identify what is similar. Identify what is different. And when we say what is different and similar, you must, besides the actual principles. So the first level is to understand the principles. The second one, which is a little bit more challenging, is understand how did they ask the required. Generally, WACC is straightforward. They just say, dear student, calculate WACC. So generally, that is straightforward. But for other required, it may not be as straightforward as, dear student, calculate WACC. Then you want to make sure in both questions, for example, they ask you to do capital budgeting. But how did they ask you to do capital budgeting in question 1 versus how did they ask you to do capital budgeting in question 2? See the differences, see the similarities. Then you want to see the principles that they tested. What was the similarities? What was the differences? In the one question, they may have had opportunity costs. In the other question, they did not have opportunity costs. In both questions, they had working capital. But in the first question, working capital was in year 0. And in the second question was in year 1. Why was that the difference? Things like that. Then the next level would be, how did they present the information in the scenario? Were you able to, what was the similarities? What were the differences? Did you understand what they presented? Now, if you can understand this level of analysis, it's on another level. So the chance of you running through many questions is slim, because you're going to take so much time doing these questions, but you're doing it so thoroughly. Before you attempt, so like for example, I used to attempt 3 questions max, because I was always delayed. I wasn't usually on time. I wasn't very diligent when I was studying. So that's why I could only manage about 3. But for example, for those of you who are diligent, you maybe want to say you want to do 5 questions. So whether you do 3 or 5, let's say you do 5, then let's say 3 of it is by doing this this deep level of learning. Every time before you attempt the next question, you must always ask yourself, what did you learn in the previous question? Remind yourself what you have learned. And what was the lessons? What did you get right? What did you get wrong? Before you attempt the next question, you want it fresh in your mind, so that when you attempt the next question, you don't make the same mistake. By default, because you are becoming better and better, without making time management the aim of the process, without making it the aim of the process, by default, you must be getting faster by default, okay? You can time yourself how long it took for the question without making time management the aim or the goal. But once you come to, let's say, question 4, so if you're doing 5 questions, let's say 3 you do thoroughly, then the last 2 you do under time pressure. When you do under time pressure, it's important to try and put yourself in the, you're not going to be able to exactly, but try to put yourself in an exam mode. So no cell phone, nothing. Whatever exam mode is all about, you must do the same. No distractions, no phone, nothing. And now you sit with your, by writing the question under time pressure. But before you write this question under time pressure, remind yourself that, okay, I'm going to do a test 2. By test 2, which topics we covered, and what are the key issues within each of those topics. So you must tell yourself. So you maybe do this an hour before the time, and then remind yourself, okay, for the past 3 questions, these are the principles that was covered. This is what I got right. This is what I got wrong, and how do I avoid getting it wrong again. So when you attempt your 4th question, which is now under time pressure, you have trained your brain in terms of what are the key issues, because by knowing the key issues within the various topics, when you read a scenario, it's going to jump out at you. So you're not going blindly into a question. Number 2, you have reminded yourself of the various issues you have come across and how it needs to be corrected. So when you go into question 4, you now sit under time pressure. You have 2 color pens. If you write in blue, that's your main. For the first 60 minutes, you write in blue. If you're not finished, continue writing. Don't stop. Continue writing, but just switch the color of your pen. So if you're going to mark in red, then don't use red. Let's say you use black. So when you finally you mark the entire question paper. You can see whether you passed or failed, okay, or how well you did. Then you must count the second time, and you only count the blue that you wrote in 60 minutes. And that will tell you if you pass the entire question paper, it's an indication that you know the content. Now you need to then see how much you do get for the blue section, the first 60 minutes. That will tell you whether it is only a time management issue. If you didn't pass the entire paper, even though you wrote more than 1 hour, then it's not just a time management issue, it's also a content perspective. Okay, so just keep that in mind. With time management, you need to develop an exam technique, and you need to already know how you'll set out your question. So, for example, when you get a WAC question, there's a typical way you must know how you're going to set it out. When you get a capital budgeting question, you must already know how you're going to set it out to such a level. So, for example, when I was a student, I used to write. What we used to do, they didn't like you to draw columns freehand. They wanted you to use a ruler. You must already know how you're going to draw columns. So I already knew when I took a ruler, I took a thin ruler in. I never took a fat. You know, you get a broad and you get a thin. So I took a thin ruler in, so that the reason why I took a thin ruler is that represents each column. So when I draw a line, I just draw columns with each ruler. I don't still measure. So that saved me time. I already pre-planned that. Before, when I get when I must draw columns, I use my ruler to draw columns so they don't feel grumpy when they look at my paper that it looks untidy, so it looks neat. I already know how I'm going to set. If there's a lot of columns, how my page is going to look. Whether you're going to draw your page landscape or whether you're going to have your page portrait. So it's those minor things that actually makes a huge difference. You can't come to the exam and still think how you're going to set up a question and still think how you're going to lay out your answers. That is why when you practice, you must practice the exact same way that you're going to write in the exam. What some students do, when they practice, they only answer the question and the workings they do on a calculator without writing the workings down. So you have trained yourself that the way you do a question is by doing a scenario, answering the actual question without doing workings. Now come the exam, you have to do workings because you will lose marks if you don't. Now you're going to struggle because you haven't trained yourself how to set out your workings. I remember reading an article or someone was telling there was one Olympic swimmer, I think he won gold, whatever. And he explained the level of detail he goes into his preparation. Now, this may seem extreme, but this is what got him to get gold, whatever he won. I think it was Olympic swimmer, whatever he did. He was a swimmer for sure. And he explained this as follows. He say every day he train in the exact same way as he would do on the day of the event. So, for example, he ate the exact same meal that he's going to eat on the training, the event day. So he ate the exact same meal. He did the exact same routine. So for example, he first eat, then he put on his swimsuit, then he put on his cap, then he put on his glasses. Every single day it was in that order. He didn't change it. He didn't then one day put glasses first, then the other day cap. Every single day he did it the exact same way. Then and where he did it was on the exact same spot he's going to do it for every day. So then he gets up, he took the exact number of steps from where he's going to sit up until where he needs to stand to jump into the pool. If that was 20 steps, every single day he made sure he got dressed 20 steps before the time, so that when he takes his 20 steps, that's all of his so if you understand the level of detail he went into, how he got dressed, what he eat, the order he ate, what he puts on, when he puts it on, how he walks, how many steps he take up until he gets to that what you call it, whatever, the stand that you must jump into the pool. So he was saying what he made sure he trained thoroughly and consistently for everything within his control, so that when something out of his control happen, he only has to deal with that. And he explained that when he did all of this preparation, so for like I said, the way he put on his stuff, take off his gown, whatever they wear, he takes off his gown at a certain point. I think he first gets up, walk 5 steps, take off his gown, then walk the next steps. Before he gets there, he puts on his cap, then his goggles. Then he jumps into the pool. So what happened in this race, his goggles got filled with water and he couldn't see. But because everything else was thoroughly trained, he only needed to deal with something that was so unexpected of water going into his goggles. And the way he dealt with it was he somehow had an idea of how many, what do you call that? Whatever laps, whatever it is, not laps, whatever you call it, he needed to make. So he counted. So because remember the danger was that he could knock his head into the wall. So he counted and he just kept going. But he said because his mind was so clear, he only needed to deal with that water in his goggles that he could focus on. He just needed to count. And he still won the race. He didn't know he won until he saw he won. But basically, he explained he believes it was that type of preparation. So the same thing when you practice. If part of your answer is on the back of the envelope and part of the answer is in the book, you're not training how because you're not going to write on the back of the envelope in the exam. So make sure you train to that level exactly how you're going to write in the exam. So just make sure you take your training seriously, because on the day, same like Ronaldo, he trains hectically before the game. So on the game, he's ready. So you don't have to worry because he did all his preparation. He didn't train one way in the training camps, and then on the day he does something else. They do exactly what they do every time when they come to the game. So they only have to deal with anomalies of the game. And they already accounted for everything that is within their control. So same thing over here. So how do you apply that to yourself? You know what is within your control. So what is within your control is the amount of sleep you get. What is in your control is how consistent you study. What is within your control is how you attempt every question every single time, how you set out your question every single time. what is within your control is you already know before test 2 what are the topics. You can already know what are the various issues. So that on the day of the exam, the things you should be knowing, you know. And the only thing you need to deal with is something you don't know. What don't you know is the exact question, how it's going to be asked, and what the exact scenario is. So you only have to deal with that. So you already know WAC. You already know capital budgeting. You already know what is the issues within capital budgeting. You already know what is the issues within the weighted average cost of capital. You already know the various methods. You already know what you have made a mistake with and what you have corrected. You already know if it is a WAC question, what you're going to, how you're going to set out your question. You already know if it's a capital budgeting question, how you're going to lay out your answer, how you're going to set out your workings. All of that kind of stuff you already know. What you don't know is what the exact question is going to be, what the exact scenario is going to be. But because all of that training, you will be able to handle whatever is given to you. But if the training was not up to scratch, then you're going to still have to deal with the lack of training plus the complexities of what you don't know, the unexpected. So to minimize it and to become better at it, make sure you are well equipped with that which is within your control. They always take heed of the best sports persons. Just look at how they train and use the same um, methods or same thinking and apply it in your studies. So for me, like the sports people, they're probably one of the best examples to use when they come to the big event, how they train. Use the best. If you compare Jesse Lingard with Ronaldo, very different. Jesse Lingard is always dancing on his Instagram. But if you look at Ronaldo, is always training on his Instagram. Big differences. So when you come to the main event, who is the more superior, Jesse Lingard or Ronaldo? You don't see Ronaldo dancing in on the training grounds and stuff like that. He's training. He's not posting videos of him. I don't know what, making funny videos. He's always training. But Jesse Lingard is always posting videos of him having fun. That's why he's at West Ham and not anymore at Manchester United. So if you think of those type of things, look at the best sports people. Look what they are doing. What are they getting right? Take the same philosophies and principles and apply it to your studies. You're going to see it's going to make a difference, a significant difference. Like I said, the way, so our level of training is the way that we explain how you compare various questions, even though you're answering a particular question, but after that question, make sure you can ask yourself the what ifs. Get all of that right. So after question 1, you effectively covered the entire topic. So now you go on to the next one, and you somehow already covered the entire topic. So when you go to question 2, you are in a better position and you should become faster. But time management not the issue yet. Then you go to question 3, same story. You are better than what you were when you did question 2. Still not focus on time management as yet, but you should be faster automatically. But now when you come to question 4 and question 5, you sit under time pressure and then follow that technique where you write the full question paper, even if it's beyond 60 minutes. But after 60 minutes, change your color pen just to get an idea of how you are doing. But remember, the way you train in question 1, 2, and 3 must be the same how you train in question 4 and 5. I'm not saying you can't improve, you have to improve, but don't in question 1 write on the back of the paper for your workings. Then on question 2, you put it in the paper. Then question 3, half is in the paper and half is on the back of an exam question paper. So just make sure everything is consistent. You're going to see consistency is going to pay off. And then each time you improve upon the last time. Try it. You're going to see it's going to work. It's going to be hard, but it's the hard things that is going to make the big difference. Just watch, like for example, like if you're on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram at the moment, but when I used to be on Instagram, Sergio Ramos, if you're into soccer, Sergio Ramos from Real Madrid and Spain, Cristiano Ronaldo, look at how they train. They train, they're basically always training. But that is the level of commitment and dedication that they're taking to their work. What is your work? Well, part of your work is maybe actually working, but it is also the studying. Look at the sports people. Like I say, you can also use business people, but like you can't really see what business people do other than the actual results, but you can see what sports people are doing because you can see how they train and all of those type of things. Apply to your studies. It's going to make a significant difference. So just think about that, and that's how you will improve. That's how you're going to improve your exam technique, and that's how you're going to improve time management. Time management is achieved with two things: an improved exam technique and knowing your content. So by knowing your content is how I told you, by comparing different questions and learning what you have done right, learning what you have done wrong. How are you improving exam technique? Each time you have a look how to better set out your question. Knowing already, if it's 10 columns, you rather set up your question landscape. If it's 5 columns, then it's okay to set up portrait. The size of your ruler. Are you going to measure every line? Are you going to randomly draw? They like neatness. So like I said, what I did, I took a thin ruler in. So I just used my ruler as my columns. So it's those type of small things that improves exam technique. Where's your workings? Your workings is below the actual scenario. So you start off with the answer or the main workings, and then the other workings that feeds into your answer is below. It's small things of that nature, how you set out your working. So for example, if you look at financial reporting, group accounting, you must already know, if you get a profit and loss question, how you're going to calculate profit or loss, how you're going to calculate the split between parent and NCI. All of those are small things that adds up in the end. So like how I showed you to approach it is probably a very good way. I won't say it's the best, but if I could say it is the best, I would say it is the best. I believe it's one of the best ways, where you work out each company separately: profit for parent, profit for NCI, for sub 1, profit for sub 2, profit for associate. Each one separately, start with their profit, do group adjustments, get profit from a group perspective 100%. Then you can do NCI's portion for subsidiaries and your portion as an associate. You have those all set out in your workings so that when you do the actual profit or loss statement, just plug and play. So it's those type of small, minute differences that makes a big, that significantly has a positive impact. If I use again a sports example, you will hear many times, especially in cricket, they will say it is better to improve 100 things by 1% than to improve one thing by 100%. So it is better to improve 100 things by 1% than to improve one thing by 100%. In self-development, if you read books on self-development, articles on self-development, like I follow a few venture capitalists that invest in startup companies. One of the CEO of the one, he shares many lessons. He calls it entrepreneurial lessons for venture capitalists. I mean, and entrepreneurial lessons from a venture capitalist. So I have him on LinkedIn. Every day I go read of what he says. In one of his posts, he also makes mention it is this 1% differences each day that have a significant impact in the end, because basically it's 365 days in a year compounded. So to the power of, so it's 1% compounded by 365, which has a significant impact in the end. So same thing over here as those minute improvements those 1% improvements, those 101% improvements that have a significant impact, positive impact. So just think about that. Don't think about trying to do one question under time pressure 100%. That is 100% improvement. Whereas do the little things, all those little things that will have a significant impact. So take heed of that, try, implement it, think about it, and reflect on what you are doing. When you go after this lesson, we're going to cover now in financial analysis, go rest. And when I say rest, go lay and just think about financial analysis and then do a question. Sometimes thinking is better than doing. You must do, but you must also think. One last example, Warren Buffett. I'm pretty sure many of you know Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, and same with Bill Gates, their schedule for the day is very minimal. Like Warren Buffett showed, he has a small book. He showed it to the interviewer, and the guy was surprised. The guy's like, it's only like 2-3 things on your calendar. Like, what's the big deal? So he said, yes, that's exactly the point. I only have 2-3 things, because the rest of the time I sit and think. He said many people think that being productive is having the calendar jam-packed. But actually being productive means you have less things to do and you have a lot of time to actually think what you are doing, reflect about your day, reflect of what you need to do, what you just did, and all of those type of stuff. Spend time thinking. Like this entrepreneur, this venture capitalist guy as well. He also, one of his lessons for entrepreneurs is he tells entrepreneurs, take some time out thinking. If you can do it every day, do it every day. Ideally every day, but at least once a week. Take some time out just to think. No doing, just thinking. So same for you guys. When you take some time, even if it's just 15 minutes for each topic, after you have covered what you have covered, take some time just to think what you have learned, what the topic is about, what are the key issues. If you did a question already, what did you get right, what did you get wrong, and why, and how can you fix it? Those type of things. Now, I can speak for the thinking part because I think a lot. So I do less, but I think a lot. So when I was a student, that's how I used to study, by thinking or just reviewing. It does work. Don't just think, you need to do. So don't do what I just did. I just think. You need to do as well. So if you get that balance right, you're really going to excel. So think about it and try to implement it. I know it's difficult for some people to sit and think because they think they're not doing much, but you will see sometimes it's better to think than to do another question, which is just to clear and to get clarity of what you have actually learned. So that's all I wanted to say. That's going to help you get your exam technique. That's going to help you to improve your understanding of the content, and that's going to help you to excel, to manage your time better. But we'll remind you throughout the next 3 to 4 weeks so that it finally sinks in, and hopefully some of you implement it. Okay, so let's go on to financial analysis. This is a quick topic. I'm going to do a very quick discussion with you, probably 10 minutes. Then we'll do a quick scenario. Scenario is quick. It's also just it is a discussion-based question. When it comes to financial analysis, before we get into the nitty-gritties over here, just some high-level overviews. Financial analysis you're going to use all the time. Okay, if you audit, you're going to use financial analysis. You use financial analysis when you, especially if you're the senior on the audit, you use financial analysis to help you identify some risks. Okay, and so you do so part of the planning phase in auditing, you do an analytical review. The big analytical review is go through the trial balance, compare last year with this year, identify high movements. Okay, so financial analysis plays a key role over there. As a financial accountant, you're gonna have to do financial analysis all the time, whether you explicitly do it or implicitly, because you're gonna need to understand and explain to the finance manager as to what happened to your numbers. So you're basically doing financial analysis. If you become an investment analyst, financial analysis is your bread and butter. You're gonna have to know it inside out, because the level of detail financial investment analysts go in with financial analysis is on another level. Same if you're going to corporate finance as well. Financial analysis is not something that is done on its own. It is just basically part of further analysis. It helps you with decision making. It's not used solely on its own, and but it helps you in making necessary decisions. Okay, so just take note of that. The second important thing to take note is that there are many, 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 many financial ratios. We're never going to go through all of them. We're going to go through the key ones, okay? But by understanding the basic ones, if something pops up in the exam, you must be able, with your understanding, to be able to do that ratio. Similarly, if you head into the banking sector have some certain specific ratios. We don't cover that. In the insurance industry, financial services industry, they have specific ratios. We don't cover that. In the mining industry, the oil and gas industry, they have specific ratios. We don't cover that. There are many, many ratios. We're just going to cover the typical ratios. That said, even with the typical ratios, there are different ways of calculating the same ratio. So when you Google, you'll get maybe more than one way of calculating it. And all of them may be correct. Some may be more correct than others, or some may be more correct given a certain circumstance. Okay, but for our purposes, we're going to follow standards and a standard way of calculating it. But why I'm telling you this, when you get into the real world, don't think only the ratio that you know is the only way. There are more than one way of doing the same ratio. The important aspect is that you are consistent from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, year 4. Because you are analyzing across periods, you need to be consistent. You can't go 1 year, do it that way, next year do it a different way, then your analysis will be meaningless because you're not comparing apples with apples. So that's important background, okay? So we said, what is the purpose of financial analysis? It's just basically to help you with further analyzing a company and to help you with any decision making. So that is the basic purpose of financial statement analysis. There are various approaches to financial statement analysis. You get a ratio analysis, you get index analysis, you get common size analysis, you get comparative, and all of those type of things. So there are typical 4 ways. We're going to go through the one which is ratio analysis. So getting into ratio analysis, you must understand that ratio or financial statement analysis is meaningless. It is useless if you're only looking at 1 year, because then what are you analyzing? In order for it to be meaningful, in order for it to be useful, you need to compare it to something. So generally you will compare it to the prior year, or you will compare it to an industry benchmark, or you will compare it to budget, or you will compare it to a competitor. You're comparing it to something, okay? Without comparing it, you can't make any, you can't perform any analysis. So it's important to take note. Now, for our purposes, there's a few issues that you need to be aware of. Number one, you need to be able to know the various categories of financial ratios. So for example, the categories are profitability, liquidity and solvency, asset management, debt management, and so forth. So on the platform, you go through the typical categories, but you need to know the typical categories. Why? Because they may say, dear student, please determine the profitability of the company. Dear student, please comment on the solvency and liquidity of the entity. As a result, you're going to need to know that is a category, and you're going to need to know the various ratios within that category. So number one, you need to know each category. Number two, you need to know the various ratios that make up the categories. So for example, under the liquidity and solvency category, you will have, so for liquidity, you have current ratio, you have the asset test ratio. For solvency, you have the debt ratio, you have the debt equity ratio, you have the interest cover ratio, and you have the gearing ratio. So those are the typical 6 ratios that fall under liquidity and solvency. So number one, you're going to need to know the categories. Number two, you're going to need to know the various ratios within each category. Because sometimes they're going to say, dear student, determine the profitability. So you must know profitability is a category, and you must know the various ratios or the typical ratios that falls within that category. Sometimes it will be specific. You'll say, dear student, please determine gross profit. Dear student, please determine net profit. So now they're giving you the specific ratio. So we said number one, the category. Number two, the specific ratios. Number three, you need to know the formula for each ratio. Okay, you need to know gross profit is gross profit divided by sales. You need to know the specific formula for each ratio. Why this is important? Because you get under the solvency category, you have the debt ratio, and then you have the debt equity ratio. The debt ratio is debt divided by total assets. So the debt ratio is total debt divided by total assets. The debt equity ratio is in long-term interest-bearing debt divided by equity. So both formulas have debt, but the one formula uses total debt, the other formula uses long-term interest-bearing debt. So that is why you need to know the various, what makes up each ratio. So that's 3 levels so far. The category, then the ratios of each category, and then the specific formulas for each ratio. So you must know exactly which numbers to use. Okay, so once again, the debt equity ratio is long-term interest-bearing debt over equity. But another person may use total debt, but we use long-term interest-bearing debt. Just take note of that. So that is the third thing. The fourth thing now is being able to comment on the ratio. Okay, so you need to know 4 things. Number one, the category. Number two, the ratios that make up the category. And number 3, you need to know the formulas for each ratio. So I just give the typical ones. On the platform, you can go through it. Then number 4, you need to comment on the ratio. For our purposes, you don't need to write a thesis, but how do you comment on a ratio? Remember, the importance of commenting on the ratio is to provide insight. Okay, so you need to provide insight. The first thing you must do, you need to state the obvious, whether the ratio improved or deteriorated, or whether the ratio increased or decreased. If they tell you use increase or decrease, then you use increase or decrease. If they don't tell you what you use, then you use the terminology improve or deteriorated. Now remember, something can decrease, and that means it is an improvement. Something can increase, and it can mean it is a deterioration. So just make sure you understand what is an improvement, what is a deterioration. Not everything that is an increase is an improvement. So just take note of that. So the first thing, state the obvious, whether the ratio improved, whether the ratio deteriorated. Number two, you must give a reason why. Now here, you must give a one-line sentence based on the scenario, not based on what you want to, not a generic answer. Okay, so you must give a one-line answer, a one-line sentence as to the reason for the improvement or deterioration. Okay, what's important to note, it must link to the scenario. If it's not clear in the scenario, then you can kind of give a generic answer, but still have a generic relative to the scenario. But if the scenario is quite detailed, then you can't give a generic answer. You will have to look something within the scenario. Number three, if the ratio deteriorated, then you need to provide a give a, what's the word I'm looking for? Give like some kind of way to improve the ratio. So you must give like advice or a recommendation. That's the word I'm looking for. Then recommend an improvement. So the way you comment is to state the obvious, improve or deteriorated. Then give a reason for the improvement or deterioration. If the ratio deteriorated, then you provide a recommendation for how they can improve the ratio. So just take note of that type of things. In order to comment on a ratio, you're going to have to know what each ratio is all about. Okay, you have a high level understanding of what each ratio is all about. So when you learn the category of ratios, and then you identify the specific ratios, and then you need to work through the formula for each ratio. When you're going through the formula, at that point, try to understand what the ratio is all about, what the ratio is telling you. Okay, so that when you comment, when you give a reason, you can give a reason that makes sense relative to the scenario, but it must still make sense. And remember, if the ratio decreased or deteriorated, then you must provide a recommendation as to how they can improve it based on the scenario, not based on what you just make up something. Okay, don't make up something random. You will make up something, but relative to the scenario. On a more deeper level, if for example, some of you guys are into stocks over here, and some of you are burning your money with Bitcoin or cryptos. So, the way you're going to analyze, if you look at the ratios on a little bit more deeper level, one of the ways to look at it is to look at the numerator and the denominator. What makes the numerator? What makes the denominator? So for example, the net profit ratio is equal to, so net profit tells you for every 1 rand of revenue, how much profit am I making? Okay, so if the net profit is 10%, that means for every 1 rand of revenue, I'm generating 10 cents profit. The net profit ratio falls under the profitability category. So under profitability, I have a net profit ratio. The net profit ratio is net profit divided by revenue multiplied by 100. The ratio tells you for every 1 rand of revenue, how much profit or net profit do I generate. Now to comment on that, the way you can look at it is what makes up the numerator, what makes up the denominator. So this ratio can increase in 2 ways. So it can increase by the numerator increasing. If the numerator is increasing, net profit is increasing, the ratio can go up. And just for explanational purposes, assuming the denominator remains constant. The other way is if we assume the numerator remains constant. If we assume the numerator, which is net profit, remains constant, the only way that ratio can improve is if the denominator decreases. Just think mathematically. If the smaller the denominator, the bigger the ultimate answer. That denominator is revenue. Okay, so now the net profit increased, which is a positive thing. However, it increased as a result of a reduction in revenue. The question is now, is that improvement really good? That's the question you need to ask yourself. The net profit did go up, which is positive, but it went up because the denominator decreased. The denominator became smaller, and the denominator is revenue. So the revenue became smaller. Revenue is a significant number for every business. You need to understand from the context of the scenario, is it management's intention to reduce revenue? Do they want revenue to be smaller? In most cases, companies like their revenue to be big. So you need to have a look. And if that is not the intention, why is revenue less? Is there a valid reason as to for the revenue being lower? So for example, if the revenue is lower because of another company that entered the market, or you're losing market share, that is negative, because no one wants to lose market share. If you're going to keep on losing market share, you're going to die. However, if revenue decreased because you are having more stricter credit policy, then maybe it can be a good thing. We don't know. It'll be relative to the scenario, but it may be a good thing, because stricter credit policy means you have a high quality of customer that can pay. So you may have a lower revenue because not everybody can get credit. So not everybody can buy, but those that are buying can actually pay you. You'll actually get the cash. So you see the level of thinking. Now, this is not the level of thinking you're going to do for this exams, but if you analyze a company, that is how you want to analyze it. It does not simply mean if the ratio went up, it's good. It doesn't simply mean if the ratio went down, it is bad. It's a general indication, yes, but you still want to look at the underlying rationale, the underlying reasoning. And the way you get that is by looking at what makes up the numerator, what makes up the denominator, and which one caused, or which one had the biggest impact in driving the ratio up or down. The second thing you need to also think about is looking at debits versus credits. So for example, let's say, for example, revenue increased. So for revenue to increase, it must have been credit revenue. That's the journal entry, credit revenue. For every credit, there must be a debit. What is the debit? Now remember, for revenue, the debit can be one of two things, or it's supposed to be one of two things, either debit bank or debit debtors. Now, if revenue increased by 20% and debtors also increased by 20%, then you know most of this, actually all of the increase in revenue is through credit sales. Now you must become a little bit skeptical. Why credit sales? Why was it not cash sales? So then you want to have a look and think about further details and all of those type of things. So it's those type of deep level when you analyze a company. But for our purposes, it is simple. If it's improved, good. If it deteriorated, bad, and you look for a reason. But in the real world, it is more deeper than simply thinking improvement is good, deterioration is bad. You need to have a look at what is driving the increase, what is driving the decrease. So sometimes reducing revenue can be a good thing. Sometimes reducing revenue, not a good thing. It depends on the why. So just think about that. And if you're analyzing a company, a good rule of thumb is ask yourself the 5 whys. Revenue increased, why? You get a reason. Ask another why, get a reason. Ask another why, get a reason. Ask another why, get a reason. Generally get to 5 whys, you will get a solid reason. For those of you in audit, when you want to audit a company, think about that. So you can ask at least 3 whys if in audit, but try to get to 5 whys. You'll get to the underlying reasoning as to obtaining sufficient audit evidence, and management won't be able to just sell you a story. If you accept the first why, they will be able to sell you a story. But if you go to 3 to 5 whys, it's going to be very difficult for them to sell you a story. And remember, think of, so it is understanding what drives the ratio, numerator, denominator, which caused the biggest impact. Remember, I gave you an example of keeping one constant. In the real world, one is not going to be constant. Both will be moving. You need to see which one moved the most. Which one is having the most impact on causing the ratio to up or down. Then, once you figure it out and ask yourself, why did it move? Try to get 5 whys. That's how you're going to get to the deep down as to what is the real reasoning. And then also think of debits and credits when you analyze. For every debit, there must be a credit. For every credit, there must be a debit. So just think about that. But like I said, for the test and the exam purposes, not that level of detail. But when you go into the real world, you want that level of detail. It's going to provide you with more insight. So remember, Excel can tell you whether something increased or decreased. You just have to create a formula, and Excel can tell you. But they may not necessarily know the reasoning. And now with AI and big data, they will be able to give you a little bit more detail of reasoning if they sift through information. But if you go at least 5 whys, you can still be better than a computer. So just make sure at least that you're better or match the computer. Okay. So that is that from what are the key things on the ratios and how to comment on a ratio. For our purposes, simply improve or deteriorate a reason, link the reason to the scenario, and then if it deteriorated, provide a recommendation as to how to improve. Do you have any questions? Ashita, Faid, Fakir, Nasreen?
No questions.
No questions.
Okay. Who else is here? Ryan, Larato, Helen, anything? Any questions?
No questions.
Okay. So now we can look at the scenario that I sent earlier. I'll share it on the screen here. We're going to read through it. You can go to page 107. We're just going to read the first page, where that is dealing with the current scenario, with ratio analysis. Just do some past papers where you don't have to do the full. So with the ratio analysis, you're only going to get all the ratios in one question. So go through various questions. So you work through some profitability, you work through some solvency, you work through some asset management, other debt management, and so forth. So, but then just do that aspect. Don't do the full question unless that full question is a question you want to cover, which has other topics as well. But if, let's say, the other topics is something you've covered extensively, then just deal with the aspect of ratio analysis. So I'm going to read here the first, we're just going to read up until potential acquisition. From potential acquisition, that is when we deal with mergers and acquisitions and valuations. So we now need to deal with that now. So they say South African Furnishers, SAF, is a retailer of furniture and household appliances with 100 stores located in major shopping centers around South Africa. The company sources its stock from local suppliers and through imports from foreign countries, which it then sells to the public. So this is background information. You can identify strategy and risk management issues over here, but also this will also help you with financial analysis. So for example, the import from foreign countries. So that means they are exposed to foreign currency. So of late, with COVID and with the RAND and all the corruption here, you know, the RAND has been very volatile. So that has caused significant foreign currency exchange movements. So that they can have an impact on profitability, because foreign currency is generally taken to a forex expense or other expenditure. So it can have an impact on expenditure. So just take note those subtle things. Okay. Let's say Mrs. Sibaya, whatever, okay, has requested that the Executive Management Committee, the EXCO, meet to discuss and resolve some issues of strategic and tactical importance for the company, and you have been appointed as a management accounting consultant to assist the SAF EXCO. Mrs. Sibaya is concerned about the decrease in profit and cash held and has asked the CFO to provide an explanation for this. The following information has been correctly prepared and presented to you. So you have 2020, 2019, and the percentage change. So revenue, it went up by 5%. Earnings before interest and tax. So earnings before interest and tax, EBIT, is also known as operating profit. It went down by 11.1%. So here you can see that the revenue went up, yet operating profit declined, and operating declined double the amount compared to what revenue, compared to the revenue increase. So basically, the loss in operations, in operating profit, wiped out the increase in revenue. So remember, that's obviously really bad cost control measures. So for some odd reason, their cost control measures is very, very poor. For example, Pick n Pay and ShopRite, they work on very tight margins, and the way they manage their profitability, so they obviously work on their margins by trying to get good prices from their suppliers, but on a larger scale, they also make sure that they have very tight cost control measures to ensure that profitability remains intact. So here, their profitability is really, really poor. One of the reasons for profitability could be a foreign exchange movement, and 11%, well, although you can't solely say it can only be exchange rate, but remember, they're buying their inventory from overseas. So inventory has a significant balance, and obviously a foreign currency movement where foreign currency have been moving like 10, 20% between months and between years. So with that movement in foreign currency having an impact on cost of sales, which is a big number, you can expect an adverse, such a big adverse in or such a big decline in operating profit. Then they say earnings as a percentage of operating profit as a percentage of revenue. This year it's 18%. Last year it was 21%. So there you can see there was a 3% decline in that percentage. And then we have cash and cash equivalents. Also a decline in cash and cash equivalents. So let's have a look at liquidity and working capital. So the current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. So it's 0.56 is to 1 versus 0.06 is to 1. There is no real standard. However, if we must apply a standard, then they will say the current ratio should be 1 is to 1. So here's already less than 1, and it also have deteriorated relative to last year. So what is that saying? That the company does not have sufficient current assets to cover their current liabilities, and it have also declined even further this year. Okay, so that's a problem. So basically, the company is illiquid. Okay. Then we have inventory days. inventory days. This year's 276 days, last year's 238. So that means they're taking longer to sell the inventory. We need to understand why they're taking longer to sell the inventory. So like typical reasons would be, the current environment. Okay, so with the current environment, like with COVID, okay, I don't know if this was COVID time that when I said this paper, but like with COVID happening, with people not having enough money to spend, people spend less, but they don't have money to spend. So that has an impact on the company inventory. Okay, but remember, the inventory days have increased. Increase in inventory days is not necessarily a good thing. Okay. Receivable days has also increased. So that means customers are taking longer to pay. So they've increased by 15 days. So you see the problem with this is when it comes to working capital, we have this cash conversion cycle. The cash conversion cycle is equal to inventory days plus debtors days. That is known as your operating cycle. Now, with having those 2 days increased, it means your cash is longer tied up in inventory. And then once inventory is sold, it is now tied up again in debtors, and debtors days have increased. So it's now longer in debtors. So therefore, the time it takes to convert inventory into cash is now increasing. The problem with that is you run the risk of inventory becoming obsolete. So then you can't sell it. And if it gets sold, it goes into debtors and you run the risk of debtors becoming bad. So then effectively you lose out on the cash. The third reason also, it means the longer something is sitting in inventory and the longer something is sitting in debtors, even if the inventory is eventually sold, even if the debtors eventually pay, it is the fact that you're going to need finance to fund that period. So the longer that period, the longer you need finance for. And the longer the financing period, the more money you're going to need. So just take note of that. You want to try to get your cash conversion cycle to be as short as possible. Not too short because it may hinder your sales, but also not too long that it has a negative impact. So as you can see, although you can see an increase of 16% for inventory days, that means it's a bad thing. The ratio has deteriorated because they're taking longer to pay, to convert. Same thing over here. It is a positive number, but it has a negative impact because you're taking longer to get your money. Okay, in the working capital cycle, so it increased by so the working capital cycle have increased by 16.4%. So from the time inventory is in inventory up until the time it is you receive your money from debtors, it takes 376 days, more than a year, before you get your money back. So just take note of that. Okay, so that is quite long. Okay, and then here we have payable days. So here payable days, the payable days has increased. Went from 68 to 94. So this means you are taking longer to pay your creditors. That can be positive. It can also be negative. The positive thing is that you are utilizing free finance because generally creditors is interest free. So you are using creditors to fund your working capital cycle. So the longer that period, the better, because it means you need less cash from in your bank account or from taking out bank overdraft or loans. Okay, so that's generally a good thing. The negative impact is if it is not in agreement with the creditor, that can cause a problem because it may mean that they your relationship with them deteriorates, so they won't give you favorable pricing, or they may start charging you interest, and they may not want to even transact with you. So that is the negative side. So for example, like Pick n Pay and ShopRite, they use this extensively. Pick n Pay and ShopRite, like the last time I checked Pick n Pay, was very long, I think like 2010 or something. Pick n Pay, they don't have debtors. Okay, they're very minimal debtors, but that is not through you and I, but rather through their franchises. They must pay their money, which makes sense. But for us, we must pay them cash. So they don't really have debtors. But the inventory days, they sell inventory. That time, the inventory was sold within 30 days. They paid the creditors, I think, within 60 days. That means they could sell inventory twice and then only pay the creditors for the first lot of inventory. So Shoprite does the same. They basically fund the entire working capital cycle with the creditors with creditors finance. And because the creditors is like double, like a 60 days versus 30 days for inventory, part of the creditors funds the long-term, they use some of the creditors finance to fund long-term investments. So generally it is going to be a good thing. Like for Pick n Pay and ShopRite, obviously suppliers is not going to budge much. They're not going to like fight them much because they are huge. But maybe for smaller entity, you must be a little bit more careful. But the fact that this increase can be a good thing. If they don't tell you anything else, then this is a good thing, because then that means it somewhat reduces the working capital cycle. So you need less funding from elsewhere. However, overall, the cash conversion cycle still increased. So that means you're still taking too long to receive your money because the increase in payable days have not sufficiently offset the increase in working capital days. So just take note of that. So here they say, notes on liquidity. The increase in the revenue from 2013 to 2020 was budgeted at 15%. So we budgeted 15%, yet there was only an increase of 5%. That could talk to the reason why inventory days have increased, because we budgeted 15%, so we most likely bought inventory for that increase in revenue or increase in sales. That increase in sales did not happen, so now we are sitting with that inventory in our inventory balance. Okay, so that could be a reason. That could be one of the reasons for an increase in inventory days. Credit sales amounted to 20% of total revenue for the period under review. Okay, so we don't know what was it last year, but obviously with a high amount of credit sales, you're obviously exposing yourself to bad debts. So just take note of that. Okay, so you will have to comment. So in this case, there's nothing really specific to comment on. So what you can do in this scenario is give some form of generic answer, but still make it specific to this question. When I say generic, purely generic means you're going to give the definition out of the textbook. When we say generic yet specific, you use the definition of the textbook, but write it within the context of the scenario. So you use the company name and so forth. Don't just give a textbook answer. Take the textbook answer and provide it in this context with using the company name and so forth. In another scenario where it may be more specific, then you can't even just use you can't use textbook definitions. You're going to have to apply the definitions. So like one thing that is specific in this question, or two things. Number one, the increase in revenue of 15%. You can't just say that inventory days increased because it took longer to sell. That is the textbook definition. So you will say inventory days have increased, which may indicate that let's see, what was this company name? That SAF is taking longer to sell the inventory, and this could be as a result that they planned to have an increase in sales of 15%, yet only achieved 5%. So that is making it specific to the scenario. So just take note of that. And then same thing over here with credit sales, 20%. So there could be an increase of debtors. So you might just remember those type of things. Just take note, doesn't mean that a lot of your stuff is on credit that's bad. For example, for Sheeny, Markham's, Truitt's, like I think 90 to 95% of their sales is on credit. And contrast that with Mr. Price, I think close to 100% of Mr. Price is on credit, if not 100%. I mean, is cash. So Mr. Price is basically cash. I think they have some credit card now, but close to 100% is cash sales. Whereas Truitt's and Fushini, majority of their sales, like I think 90 to 95% of their sales is credit. They depend on credit sales. So when the National Credit Act comes out to make things more strict, then they always complain to say that it's going to hinder their revenue. But yeah, they always give a reason as to why. So just take note. I just went through that high level. I want you to try to answer the required on your own. Look at the solution, and then you, as feedback for next week, you must try to tell me what you have learned. Is there any areas that you're still struggling with in actually answering what they gave? But basically, after you go to the notes on the platform, attempt this question and then see how you fare. It's only 10 marks, so try your best to actually answer the question, and then you can ask me any questions next week if you don't fully understand. But that's all from me for this week. Next week for math is going to be quite intense. No, not next week, the following week. So next week is going to be a bit chilled. We're going to do mergers and acquisitions. But once we hit valuations, then the real stuff is going to take place. Okay, valuations can be very, very challenging. So make sure you gear yourself up for valuations. But next week we'll do mergers and acquisitions, which is not as hectic. Do you have any questions, Fakir?
No questions.
Okay, Ashita, any questions? Faid, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, Nasreen, Ryan, Helen. Okay,
No questions.
I think Helen and okay. So that's all from my side for this week. Next, we're going to do mergers and acquisitions. We're going to simplify mergers and acquisitions for what we need to know. Mergers and acquisitions, obviously a serious topic, challenging, but for our purposes, it's not. We're going to simplify it. Okay, we're not going to go into any detail. But when it comes to valuations, that's where the real deal happens. So make sure you gear yourself up for that. Okay. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. For those who's doing FAQ 4862, for FAQ 4864, we're going to do joint arrangements. Okay. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.